All right, welcome. My name is Fred, and I've got right here what is called a Brown Bess musket, which was a standard issue weapon for a British soldier during the War of 1812. It is a flintlock musket, which just means that it has a piece of flint stone right here, and then a hardened piece of steel right here. And when the trigger is pulled, that piece of flint stone, it goes forwards, hits that piece of metal, and it will make a whole bunch of sparks. Those sparks fall into this little dish right here called the flash pan, where you pour some gunpowder into there. The sparks hit the gunpowder, get it to ignite, which will ultimately cause a chain reaction that's going to get the weapon to fire. Sharp rock hit metal, make spark, go boom. It's really the way you can simplify that down to. It's pretty straightforward, and by the year 1812, pretty much every nation on the face of the planet, the British, the Americans, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, every nation of the day effectively are using some variation of this weapon. They're all these flintlock muskets because they all agree this is as good as it got. This is the height of infantry firearms in the year 1812 because this can be fired 4 times a minute. Well, I can see how impressed you all are. I know that doesn't sound like a machine gun by our standards today. That sounds very, very slow. But for the day, this was considered a fairly respectable weapon in terms of rate of fire. In fact, the speed of the weapon was one of its big advantages. And if you think about it with some scale, on the 27th of May, 1813, there was about 8,000 soldiers fighting for control of this fort. If they could all fire 4 rounds a minute, that meant that on the battlefield, there was about 32,000 rounds flying across the field. So every 60 seconds, that would have caused a tremendous amount of damage. And when you think about it with some of that scale, you can start to see how a weapon like this would actually function. Now, to actually get it to go, it's called a muzzle loading weapon. So you would start in the left arm, you get the command of prime and load, spin it underneath the arm. You then reach into this black box right here, it's your cartridge box, and pull out a musket cartridge. They are black powder, 100 grains of black powder inside of a paper shell, and historically you'd find a lead ball tied around at the bottom. That would serve as the bullet. We're just firing blanks today. We appreciate repeat customers here at Fort George. Firing live ammunition cuts down on that. So just blanks. You'd bring this round up to your mouth, bite off the top, pour a bit of gunpowder between the flint and the steel, what's called the priming charge. Bring the weapon down to the side, pour the rest of the round down the top of the barrel, powder, paper, and ball all going down. You then take out this long stick right here, it's called the ramrod. Use it to push the round straight down to the bottom, make sure it's secure. Take the ramrod back out, and then roughly 15 seconds later, you're ready to fire. Now, once you were ready to fire, you would pull down on this hammer right here, squeeze the trigger, that piece of flint would fly forward, create those sparks, fall into this dish right here, the flash pan, ignite the powder. There's a small hole drilled into the side of the barrel. The explosion would shoot through that hole, set off what you put on the inside, and then the contained explosion would push the musket ball out at the speed of about 1,000 feet per second. Altogether, it was a somewhat efficient weapon for its day. When you got on the battlefield, however, you probably had 2 main concerns. Concern number 1 is that this thing can be really unreliable. It does not like to work all the time, especially in bad weather. The flint, it goes dull. If it goes dull, it stops making sparks. If it stops making sparks, the weapon doesn't go off. If it's nice and windy, like right now, the wind can blow the sparks away. If it's raining and the gunpowder gets wet, it does not like to work if it gets wet. In fact, during the War of 1812, if it was raining on the day that you were supposed to have a battle, the battle was canceled. A bit like a baseball game, plan it for another day, because this thing is going to be really unreliable in any type of heavy rain. So it can be a pretty unreliable weapon. Now, the second big problem with it, you guys can probably see how dirty my hands are right now. This is what's called black powder fouling. The biggest ingredient in the black powder is charcoal, and it leaves a lot of that charcoal behind. That charcoal then gets inside the barrel, and you can imagine trying to push a bullet down to the bottom with the equivalent of charcoal clogging up your barrel makes it very difficult to get the round down to the bottom. In fact, it clogs up the whole barrel. Now, what makes our weapons today very highly accurate is that they have rifling, which are metal grooves which twist down the barrel, kind of like a spiral staircase, and those grooves will spin the bullet on its way out. And it's actually the spin that makes it very accurate to a very, very far distance. Now, this black gunk will clog up a rifling groove tremendously quickly, really in around 4 to 5 shots. Your grooving would be very clogged up, your reload would get very, very slow. And so most armies of the day are not equipping their soldiers with rifled weapons, even though they know how to make them. They are giving them what's called smoothbore, which is designed to not get clogged up by this black gunk as easier. The inside of the barrel is as smooth on the outside. On top of that, pretty typically, the barrel, 75 caliber, the bullet that's being fired out of it was a bit smaller. It usually ranged from around 68 to 72 caliber. So a very large shot. We got a size difference. It accommodated for the black gunk. The downside, however, is that the bullet has a little bit of wiggle room. There is nothing to guide it, so when you squeeze the trigger, it is not going to fly straight out. It is going to kind of ping pong on the sides of the barrel and then come off at a tiny bit of an angle. And that can be up or down or left or right, and I have no idea where it's going to end up. So not a sniper rifle by any degree. It's not a very accurate weapon. It was accurate, considered relatively accurate to about where we are, to around that back bastion that ends off our fort over there. That's at about 75 yards from where we are right now. At that distance, it was still considered a fairly accurate weapon. And so most battles are going to be happening within that distance. In fact, the Battle of Fort George, so where we're standing, more or less, was fought between the British and American forces at a distance of about 8 yards. If you can imagine, 8 yards British force to American force. Very, very close. Now with that, the first shot I'll do, I'll go a lot slower. I'll go step by step. I'll say all the commands you'd hear in training, and then we'll try for a bit faster. With blank cartridge, prime, load. Handle, cartridge. Prime. Cast, out. With jaw rammers and ram. Hold, arms. Make, ready. Done. Fire. Back. All right. These are having some misfires today. Let's give it another try. And I'm done. Okay, we're going to try interpreting. You'll all bear with me. Now having
Schneider, what's happening? Why is he not shooting?
That's loud.
brown bass problems and all in one demonstration. Now, in addition to the musket, you would come equipped with a secondary weapon, which is a three-sided triangular bayonet. Advantage of the bayonet, it never misfires. It's 100% accurate. What you see is pretty much what you get. Now, a lot of generals in this period would have emphasized using the bayonet actually as the key point of their strategy, with the goal of getting as close to the enemy force as you actually could, and then charging at them. If you had the advantage in numbers, it had a tremendous psychological effect. And if you can imagine receiving a bayonet charge, you're not wearing really any armor whatsoever. This is going to go right through your coat, leave you with a very nasty wound. It was very rare for armies to stand there and fight and have a bayonet fight. It was much more common for them to scatter, to get out of the way, to run as fast as they possibly could. Up that way, about 13 kilometers at a place called Queenston Heights, the Americans were invading into this colony. The British Army went to go meet them in force. The Americans got stuck up onto the heights. The British knew that they were up there, went in with the bayonet, and then as they charged forward, the Americans scattered out of the way. They started running anywhere they could. The only problem was that the only direction they could run was to the river. They ran into a series of cliffs, and as they saw the British bayonet charge still advancing on them, American soldiers began to jump into the river off the cliffs that they were on to try and escape the bayonet charge. Those that did not jump surrendered en masse, and in fact the British took about 900 prisoners on a single day of fighting, brought out solely by the bayonet. So how would you stop this? If you've ever seen in movies or television before, the British Army fights in this period in a very peculiar way, which was in a line, shoulder to shoulder, really packed together. If you had a full regiment, you'd go 500 men, shoulder to shoulder, lined up in a line, and then you'd go 2 ranks steep. So you'd have men right behind them, firing over their shoulders, doing a second row. You divide those men up into companies, which is groups of 100 men. You'd have 100 men fire, wait 2 seconds, then the next 100 men, then the next 100 men, then the next 100 men. It would ripple down the line, and by the time that the last group was firing, the first group would be reloaded. It meant you never had to stop firing. You could get off a continuous 100 shots every 2 seconds, and then you kept them packed together. You wanted them dense. 1 musket is not a particularly accurate weapon. 100 men all pointing at the same target, however, pulling the trigger together. Somebody's going to hit something. Someone was going to get the job done. And by firing in these dense formations, you could ward off the bayonet. You could stop those frontal charges. You could really tear them to shreds as they tried to make that front approach. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I can take them now. Yeah. Oh, it's the black powder. It gets everywhere. It leaves you with a wonderful goth lipstick around the lips. Yeah. Not particularly. The powder is made up of charcoal, sulfur, which you can find in eggs, and saltpeter or potassium nitrate. All of those can be found in nature and are in fact, you can find them in a lot of biological material as well. So it's not particularly toxic. It doesn't taste very good. It tastes really gross actually. But otherwise it's safe. Yeah.
So I'm assuming when they're doing like a lineup thing, they heard a lot of "you infantry, ready your bayonet," or like line up men and stuff. Like
Yeah,
they heard of that a lot.
A lot of commands and such. Yeah. What was the most reliable weapon? A cannon is somewhat more reliable in a lot of ways. It can still misfire. Pretty much every weapon of the day was based off of this flintlock mechanism, and it's the flintlock mechanism that's kind of unreliable. And so up until about really into the 1820s, when they invented what was called a cap lock, there was nothing more reliable. The cap lock, however, used a chemical compound instead of a flint and steel to get the spark created, and those were much, much more reliable. Well, this one, if you fired 1,000 shots, roughly 200 of them would misfire on average. With a cap lock, you were looking at roughly 3 shots for every 1,000 fired. So came much, much more reliable, but they wouldn't even invent those for roughly another decade after. So at the time, this was pretty much as reliable as it was going to get. Yeah.
Modern day firearms, usually you can buy a left-handed or a right-handed. Back then, were they all trained with one specific hand, or was there an option of what hand you shoot better with?
It's a good question. If you were a private citizen, you could buy a weapon that worked any way you wanted it to. If you were in the British Army, you were pretty much going to learn to use your right hand. They had an entire drill manual, and they wanted all the men to be in sync with all of the motions. And so that would have been the first thing that would have started to mess you up if you were left-handed. The bigger problem is that if you are pointing a weapon, as you pull the trigger, there's a big flash that happens right next to here. And if someone has a left-handed musket, their flash pan will actually face towards you. And as your flash goes off, you're likely to set off theirs. And so you'll probably set off their weapon when they're not ready for it to fire. And so it would start to cause issues such as that. So not really a left-handed weapon. If you were in the British Army, you were unfortunately going to have to learn how to make do with your right hand.